Yeah. I'm good. Yeah, I would have a few bites.
Keep them off. Me out there. Kelly did. Cool.
I'm usually the same way though.
Yeah.
Nobody else is getting it.
Yeah.
Hey, Carrie, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Just doing a quick audio check. It's always variable.
9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll call today's August 17th, 2021 State Board of Finance meeting to order.
You know, there's somebody in the background. Alexis, can you hear this? I don't know. It's the State Board of Finance meeting. I'm not sure that we want to hear this.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to mute that. Oh, I think he just muted himself actually.
Or I'm really happy to listen to it if that's sounds interesting.
Interesting, really.
Hi, Jay.
Hey.
All right. Well, Alexis, do we want to go ahead and get started? I see a number of people who have, jumped on at this point in time. I'm fine with getting started if you are.
Yes, ma'am, go right ahead. I'll get that agenda pulled up.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to this meeting of the Indiana Behavioral Health Commission Workforce Subcommittee for Behavioral Health. I want to do a quick round for everybody who's on, just so we can state for the record who is on the call today. Our goal is to walk through some possible recommendations based upon the litany of data we have been able to collect. So Carrie Cadwell, co-chair of the Workforce Subcommittee. I will go ahead and just let somebody shout out. We don't have a big group today.
Katie Adams with Southwestern Behavioral Healthcare. I'm the president, CEO, and also co-chair.
Sharon Bowman, Ball State University.
Jay Chaudhary, director of DMHA and the chair of the commission.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Zoe Franz, the Chief Strategy Officer at Valley Oaks Health, and I chair a North Central Legislative Forum focused on mental health and substance use for policy.
I'm Steve McCaffrey, the CEO of Mental Health America of Indiana.
I think I see Denise. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Carrie. It's actually Rick. I'm trying to change my name as we speak. Sorry.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I think that covers everybody. So welcome. So I think everybody, Alexis has the agenda pulled up. Just to kind of walk through for everybody, what we did is, based upon the last meeting, we put together a survey. That survey kind of outlined a couple different areas that we could get contributors from as to what they see as some things that we should be considering, might consider in the area of workforce development, specifically for behavioral health. A part of that listed out what do people think are the most critical things, right, facing us, that if we were looking at taking some action, these are the things that people were kind of coalescing around. And so what I did is I took that information, particularly the pieces on what is critical, and put that together. There was some pretty common themes for the most part. If all of you had access to all of those individual responses, that data was sent out a few weeks ago to you to be able to dig in on it. So what I'm hoping today is to kind of go through each one of these that we summed up and said, this seems to be a consistent theme. And then also talk through each one to see, is there a recommendation to be made here? What do we think about that? And then two is I want to make sure that we're not missing anything, right? That other individuals, when you were looking through the data, seem to see as a consistent theme that maybe I didn't pick up on when it was that we were walking through this. So if you guys is everybody okay with the idea of starting with kind of the each one of the recommendations, talking through those particular items and then the associated recommendation, deciding if there's, if we're in agreement about that, if there's some variation we want to make in that. And then at the end of walking through each one of those, I think there were a total of 7. And I think we can move pretty quick on some of them. That then if there was something missing that we would talk about that. Is everybody okay with proceeding in that fashion? Yeah, okay, I'm gonna jump in. Okay, so one of the first consistent themes, which I don't think any one of us is shocked about, and we've talked about a lot, but it is something that was highly consistent, had to do with reimbursement, right? And so, and particularly, Medicaid reimbursement. Now, there were a couple things that came up around that I think are important to consider in when we're talking about any recommendations on rates. Is one, that not only were people concerned about reimbursement as it directly related to having competitive pay, wages, and I would probably add in there, all of us as independent behavioral health employers also understand that we are employers, so escalating health insurance costs and all of those things factor into our businesses also. So in order to be competitive on that front, we have to have reasonably competitive rates, right? But then the flip side of that is we did have some individuals who highlighted the fact that, that it's maybe, I'm going to say, maybe not just about the rates, but it's also about kind of how we construct models, episodes, so the infrastructure that occurs around those rates, right? And that there may be things that we have that actually are wasteful. And I think there was a reference to the fact that if I'll give you this example, generally speaking, services and psychotherapy should be effective within a period of 20 sessions. Well, if we have people in sessions consistently for 60 to 100, episodes, and they're not, visits, and they're not achieving outcomes, that, we have to be willing to look equally at how we're structuring things, right? You know what I mean? Versus, are we achieving the outcomes we need based upon the model that's there? So it seems to me that there's this piece of the rates, there's the piece of what is potentially parts of the infrastructure that have to be looked at. And then there's a third component, which you won't see in the recommendation, which is that when we're talking about looking at anything from a rate perspective for behavioral health, there are some, and here we're talking broadly, right? Okay, so let's say we're talking about current rates for peers, for community health workers, for licensed therapists and or QBHPs. There might be something in here where there are pieces relative to OBHPs. And then there's also this piece about psychiatry and APRNs. That's a big, so that's a wide range. And when you look at groups like MDs and APRNs, what we have to understand is that the codes we use are also the same codes that primary care doctors use, okay? So we can't just say, hey, we're going to change a rate for psychiatry without bumping up against, the fact that they don't have most of their codes, most of them are not necessarily something that's specific to psychiatry alone, right? It's a standard E&M code set, which could then ultimately impact other people's reimbursement. So that part is tricky, right? The other part of this is that, so then in some of these other areas, we might be able to be more specific about how something like that is undertaken as it relates to behavioral health, because our code sets might be a bit more specific. And then there's the other piece, which I guess probably comes up against the infrastructure piece, is this something that really every rate is something that needs looked at, or is it a matter of that there are very specific rates, right? So if you had a multi-tiered process where you have to define and look at the infrastructure, right, how we pay for care, episodes of care, but then you had a few rates that you were looking at that you shifted in some way, would that make a big difference in the system? So as we're thinking about all this, the thing that I kept coming back to is, is this really what we're trying to get at is there needs to be a undertaking of a Medicaid rate study, right? That looks at just not only the care infrastructure, but, the types of codes we're talking about that can make a difference, and then what those changes potentially could be, if at all. And so that's where I came to that possible recommendation about doing a Medicaid rate study that has recommendations from it, right? So I'm going to stop there and then open that up for discussion, thoughts, reflection.
So Carrie, I just want to make a comment. I think that the Medicaid rate study is a great, longer term strategy, is that will take some significant time to do that well. But I think that it would also be helpful to highlight a more short term possible recommendation to help address more immediate issues with our essential workers that are making less than $15 an hour. So some of those rates, like peer rates and, those types of issues, to help kind of work more our immediate need with our immediate dire workforce issues with residential settings.
So Katie, besides peers, what would that be in your
Well,
consideration?
it would be looking at residential rates and looking at MRO specific to OBHP. So non-licensed or OBHP and peers.
Okay.
And then residential services, just looking at the per diem, because you're staffing a 24/7 facility, and it's difficult to recruit for that and to compete with Target or other retail that are doing $15 an hour. And I know state hospitals have the same struggle, staffing these psychiatric units. So looking at that per diem rate as well. So those are just more immediate issues that, man, if we don't do something soon, we're going to have to reduce our capacity. So I would view that as kind of more of a short term, let's get this done quickly. Whereas the Medicaid rate study, I think, is huge. I think it's very important and it needs to happen. But I think to do it well, it's going to take some time.
So just to react to what Katie said, I fully understand and appreciate the staffing challenges, and we are, as you pointed out, we're dealing with them pretty acutely in the state hospital as well. But just sort of like a point about the mechanics of it. This sort of Medicaid forecast that the legislature adopts and incorporates into the state budget happens on a biennial cycle, and so just from a pure mechanic standpoint, you're looking at the 23 session before sort of even anything can be done with that. So just again, I'm not trying to get in the way of anything. I just wanted to sort of point that out and say that, like, you couldn't make a recommendation now, but the truth is, if it has a fiscal impact at all, it would have to go into that next 23 session just from a purely mechanic standpoint.
Sure, and there may be other ways to accomplish that. My point is just that I think I see it as two things in my mind. I think there's a big comprehensive overhaul, but I also see that there's this pocket that's just really under, that isn't being addressed, that's more immediate. And so there may be other creative ways of handling that. I have no idea. So maybe the recommendation is to investigate what are the creative ways to help recruit those really difficult positions that are essential to having our services being provided.
Yeah, absolutely. I would again, I really not intending to even push back at all. I just wanted to just add that additional piece of information about the budget.
And Jay, I just want to keep in mind that I agree with you with everything except MRO. MRO, we're covering the full cost for the state on that process. So changing the rates really doesn't have to wait to 2023 because it's revenue neutral to state anyway. And when we talked to Medicaid, one of the things they told me they could do 3 or 4 years ago was we could build the match as a cost as part of the cost report and get it covered as part of the rate. And that came from Medicaid, not from me. So I think there's some things we could do with MRO to help the situation before 2023 if we wanted to.
Okay, thanks, Rick.
What about for others? Any additional reflection just on the Medicaid rate study recommendation?
So Carrie, when I looked at this and it talked about payment models and methodologies, I didn't know if you were also including the concept of CCBHC in this and whether or not we should. It seems like there's going to be opportunities from congressional action, maybe that there'll be opportunities to expand even more than we have. And it seems to me that provides a higher level of reimbursement, which affects workforce in a positive way. So like, do you see that as being part of this or not, or what's your thought on that?
Well, we can put, I agree for the case of community mental health, right? That, that is something that, we would support. Katie, I was thinking that might have been in the continuity of care recommendations that subcommittee was putting in. We can also stick it in the workforce, right? For, consistency. I mean, I'm thinking about Jay, one of the things that you mentioned at a meeting I was in, which I thought was a useful way to think about these things, is one, our goal as the BHC is to think about the system overall, right? So what are recommendations that impact us broadly from the vein of not just being CMHC focused? And then two, there's that sublayer of the specialty types of care, right? The SMI care and others that a CMHC. So we might have two layers, I guess, is what I'm thinking about here of, recommendations, which is one, right, which is going to touch upon globally the system. And then Steve, to your point, then additionally supporting that, a part of that also should be, right, the investigation and the role that a CCBHC model could potentially play in bolstering the critical access mental health system. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I would just echo that as a useful, I think, framing.
And I would, just to add to myself, I think because this does go to the Behavioral Health Commission, which was created legislatively and has legislators involved, and because there is potentially congressional action that could provide the opportunity for state action legislatively, I just think including it and stating it, using its name that's recognizable is a good thing to get people thinking and moving in that direction.
Steve, are you also kind of advocating for changing us from a demonstration state to a full-fledged funding state for CCBHC?
Definitely.
Which is probably something we need to add to the agenda, Carrie. Would that make sense?
So we can add that. We can do this two ways. One, we can add that as an additional recommendation, right? As a part of the list of recommendations that we'll provide to the BHC. So if I remember correctly, the next full BHC meeting is at the end of September, I believe.
Yeah,
and so
right.
So our goal is to come up with something that's tangible that this group kind of approves as that, hey, we'll present this to the BHC to say, these are the recommendations that would come, for additional consideration. Now, what happens at that level from here, right? And I mean, I don't know, but we could add that, Rick, as a specific recommendation. We could add it as when we're talking about and maybe that's better than including it actually in the Medicaid rate study, because I'm still a fan of that a rate study needs done, right? I think our problem, and maybe I tend to be a little bit different on this front, is I don't think universally it's always the solution to say every single rate changes. I don't think that it's hard enough to change your rate to then say across the board that, everything under Medicaid needs assessed, or, everything under, the MRO program needs assessed. I mean, I think those are pretty big asks, right? I mean, without saying, are we redefining the system? But if we could do a rate study and then we could additionally say, hey, we really want to further invest for the critical access mental health in the CCBHC as a secondary recommendation. I mean, to me, I feel like we would get at the two main ideas that we need.
Yeah, just to answer your question of the mechanics, Carrie. I think we're sort of feeling this out as we go, obviously. But I think having talked to some folks, there is a lot of anticipation for our final report, kind of leading up to that 23 session. So, I think that anything that involves funding, we're going to probably make into more of a final recommendation. But if there is in fact an appetite for using, for example, the Children's Commission template to make an interim recommendation, I think that's something we should discuss as a larger commission. But those would be kind of really simple, lower hanging fruit sort of things for the legislature to consider. So as we're going through this, if there's something you think would be a good idea there, I would say speak up. And we'd probably use, like I said, the template that the Children's Commission uses for recommendations. Now, it's not going to get the same sort of reaction or fanfare because it's not going to be any kind of we only have one official bite at the apple, right? Is that final report, because we sort of COVID blew our interim report deadline. But again, it's just one of those things where mechanically we'll have to figure that out as a commission, but we're open for that.
And a question, Jay, on logistics of Zoe, because I fully agree with Katie about the short-term fix. Are we able to, in that recommendation, put some concrete recommendations around the additional COVID funding that the state is receiving for mental health to kind of help maybe bridge that gap until the 2023 budget? Because I do agree, without some financial resources around MRO and peers and that access, especially with 988 scheduled to roll out with the mobile assessment teams prior to all this, that we need to put some sort of funding there workforce wise. So could we make some concrete recommendations around that?
Yeah, I'll say, I'm just the chair of the commission. I'm not, I don't speak for the commission as a whole. I think that if that's something this group wants to do and take the commission as a whole, that's not something I feel even I would be able to stand in the way of if I wanted to.
Okay.
This is Sharon, and I just want to make sure that I chime in and support Katie and Zoe in what they're saying.
Yeah, I would. This is Steve, and I just wanted to pick up on what Jay said. We officially don't have a bite of the apple, but I think there would be a lot of interest, and we could garner a lot of attention for an interim report. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
So what I have down here is we want to state as an additional recommendation, kind of similar to where we have it in a couple different places, that whether it's the ARP or whatever additional funds, right, that have come into the state from numerous different areas, that, it be targeted as potentially creating pathways to support organizations, right, under the short term in order to maintain staffing, expand staffing, fill gaps in that area. Katie and Zoe, is that kind of the recommendation that we're talking about here?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Let me ask a question on that. What I've used this word so many times this morning, but from a mechanic standpoint, what would that subsidy look like? Just again, as the person that would be sort of tasked with figuring out how to actually make it happen, I'm just curious, about what your thoughts are on that.
So, I mean, some of the ideas that I've seen from other states and just on the mechanics, because I understand we don't want to do something that is going to impact us long term, but it is, for example, I think I did the math that if we took the 100 million that was earmarked for mental health and we paid for people to go back to social work to get their master's and to get their license, and they make a commitment to stay in rural Indiana to be able to provide those services, that would be a real short-term beneficial way to infuse the supports we need into our system right away.
And
So it wouldn't be, for example, because this is where I think the disconnect is, because what I'm hearing from you, both Katie and Zoe, is using that to somehow subsidize or augment rates. But what I'm hearing from that suggestion was more of a broader focused workforce development piece of it. Not that they're mutually exclusive, but those things can certainly exist in the same.
Yeah, I think that's where I was trying to figure out a short-term solution to the rates, because I understand that that's more a long-term financial impact. And so what could we do short-term from a workforce development standpoint? So I don't know, maybe Katie has some ideas on the mechanics of rate short-term. That's where I've been trying to be creative outside of that, because I don't know how we can do that.
Just
So
to be
can I
clear,
offer-
short-term rates is a really hard nut to crack for a lot of reasons, but I think that's just, but yeah, anyway, go on, sorry.
Can I ask a quick question here? Zoe, would that be different than what we're talking about under recommendation number 4, which is loan forgiveness funding? So one of the things we did recommend was that that money do be put into the loan forgiveness program, and that also included in that would not just be licensed providers, but certified providers, right? Because we want to include kind of that peer workforce and other, CHWs. What you're talking about right now, would that fall under number 4, or is it something different?
No, it would be different in that we actually, tie it into the raise awareness for workforce options. And we actually, as a state, put incentive out there for people to get into mental health workforce in the short term. So it would be a little different. That loan forgiveness is more for people who are already in the system and kind of helps with that. But it doesn't really, what we saw when that legislation originally rolled out is it didn't really help us get more people in. It helped us with our current workforce. And so for me, like Katie was saying, if we don't do something on that front for an immediate fix to get people in, then we're going to end up having services shut down and access issues.
So, okay, I have one more question, because I really appreciate the way you've laid this out. So you're suggesting, kind of OBHPs / sort of like attendance, that sort of workforce. Is that, to clarify, that's what you're talking about?
That's part of it, Jay, and that's kind of close to my heart, because I'm thinking a lot about residential and trying to keep residential type settings going, right? You can't do that without 24/7 staff. And I like this idea of focusing on how to get people into our workforce, because right now a lot of those individuals are out in retail or doing other things, but maybe they have a heart for this population. So a big barrier is we're not able to offer $15 an hour, and you can get 15 plus other places. And so I did read in some of the ARP, examples of usage is to give essential workers premium pay to bring those folks up to $15 an hour. So just weird thought, what if we use some of that money as a state to allow, those that have residential settings or, provide mental health services to make sure all of their direct care essential workers make at least 15. But
So
would
would the funding go to, again, I'm just mechanically speaking, would it go to the providers, or would it go to the individuals in this case?
Well, I mean, it could be either. But, in my mind, when I was thinking about it, would go to the provider per FTE kind of a thing.
Jay, I just one idea. So I think there are a bunch of ways you could do this, but in terms of operationalizing an example, what if we had an OBHP certification? What if we use some of the funding for the training and the certification of that? What if we had a higher reimbursement add-on for providers when they have individuals with the certification? That would be an example. That we could do endorsements to peers like recovery coaches, like a forensic endorsement, whether that be in Recovery Works or otherwise, and have an add-on for that specialty expertise. I think there are a number of ways you could do add-ons for specialty expertise in the short run that then gets you to the budget session where you could increase the reimbursement rate.
Also, Jay, I see the difference between what Zoe was talking about and the loan forgiveness is you got people who may not know how to get loans to go to school, or maybe if worried about the debt of going to school, and if we're paying for their stuff up front, then they're not you release that anxiety that they have of dealing with the debt and all that, and you're probably going to get people into the system to go who otherwise wouldn't go, even though they may want to go, have a dream to go. They just can't figure out a way to finance it to get to the loan forgiveness stage of the process.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think it's a useful framing because I think we're talking about both recruitment and retention, which are two sides of both equally important, I would say, sides of the workforce.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Carrie, I know that I kind of got off on that Medicaid rate, but I just was trying to figure out maybe another bullet point to address kind of the immediate concern, like short-term, plan with COVID funds or additional, dollars that could maybe go up underneath that to where it would be that bridge to that long-term vision.
So I think I could write something up just on that front that differentiates that, because what I'm hearing is we're taking the Medicaid rates and we're saying, yes, there definitely needs to be a study. There needs to be, second to that, some level of endorsement from our group about, again, which is well, I shouldn't say longer term to set it up, but shorter term strategy for CCBHC might be, ensuring that we're passing something similar to, I can't remember, is it Illinois, or that recently kind of just had that legislation to study CCBHC more closely, right? You know what I mean? To take a step towards it. And then third, what I'm hearing is that, being clear about how funds can, the current COVID funds or what have you. I don't know what terminology, we need to use there because there's obviously a couple different mechanisms for that money coming in and might have different parameters on how it could be used. But how that money becomes just a stopgap right now, and I've got down here, the different options that we just talked about. So I'll play with them a little bit to send it out to everybody again. But I heard, kind of incentives for the building of the pipeline, really the kind of hourly rate that we pay, in general for, and again, what I hear is OBHP and peers. And within that OBHP, you're going to have people who are whatever your traditional case managers and or tech positions, because OBHP as a group doesn't necessarily convey job title or job role. And then peers. And I guess I'm wondering, I'm just going to put this out here and I wonder what people think. I mean, part of sometimes when I think about the mechanics and trying to make something relatively simple is, that stopgap being a process under which there's really just kind of a reasonable, RFP process, right? To kind of say, here is what it is that's available to apply for, right? You know what I mean? And then this is in each place bolstering what they know they need to bolster. So, I'm thinking about the fact that, are we doing this on a per provider basis? Well, what if some people already pay $15 an hour for certain roles, right? What are we targeting more tech roles, like Katie's saying, you know what I mean? The peer roles. It's in my head, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here. It can be really hard, I think, to target, one thing overall, and then really hit the needs, right, of various aspects of different sectors. So whether that's community mental health or that's recovery, community organizations. So, is there any thought on or feedback on what if there was just an overall RFP process, right? You know what I mean? Under which there's some set parameters, but that specific organizations relative to critical access needs, right, in the state would be able to simply apply for the funds they need with an outline plan of how that works, right, for their center and or organization, such that it bolsters, right, workforce and the ability to, better meet current needs and priorities, right? So within the RFP process, the state then says, these are our priorities, right? You know what I mean? And then you're really kind of addressing those. I don't know, thoughts on that?
Carrying out what some of the other states have done with the RP money. They've actually done proposals and within certain restrictions and guidelines that are in the RFP funds to start with, and then figured out ways at the center level of how to use the money to meet the requirements and improve services within their agency?
So yeah, we just to share, we fully plan, and our money is still in state budget limbo at this point, and maybe there for a while, just completely transparently. But we do plan on a pretty substantial portion of it being more public facing in terms of just like a call for proposals from groups, including, for example, the Indiana Council would be an example of that. So, that just from again talking about mechanics, that seems to be the word of the morning. That I think just as something to put a pin in. We have to balance, I think, a whole lot of different factors as we take a look at this 100 million. I mean, there's lots of eyes on it, lots of hands out. Legislators are very aware of it. They have their kind of pet project in their community that they want to get funded. And so, even though it sounds like a lot of money, $100 million, and it is a lot of money, $100 million, I think what we will end up seeing is it's going to, nobody's going to be totally satisfied, but hopefully everybody will be like a little bit happy about it. And then we also do have, the potential opioid settlement coming down the pike, which is, depending on where that lands out, about a 207 million up to $500 million with significantly less restrictions in a lot of ways. So let's keep that pot of money in mind too.
Jay, is there a better way just to reference all that funding with one designation as opposed to, listing? Because there's ARP, right? There's then the enhanced block grant money that potentially comes in, and then there's the
calling it
opioid
COVID stimulus funding.
Okay.
It's not entirely accurate, but I think that's been our sort of catch-all term.
Okay. All right. So if we're just to finalize, then at least maybe it's number one. So I hear, okay, Medicaid rate study. Yes, that's a longer term strategy. Number two, CCBHC, which might be connected to some initial legislative advocacy, okay, for potentially studying and furthering the development of that, even if that ends up happening faster, right? Because of anything maybe that happens federally, I don't know. But then number three is, really a recommendation on the use of the COVID stimulus funding to bolster, workforce priorities among critical access, mental health and substance use services. I mean, anybody have any thoughts on how we want to write that so that we can really emphasize the fact, and I'll write in there that this is really of an urgent, it sounds like, really urgent need to be thinking about it now, as opposed to those, again, long-term strategies. But any thoughts on terminology that would be better suited for that recommendation?
I like that, Carrie. I don't know if it's worth just, I think it's pretty powerful to say that our mental health workers aren't making $15 an hour. And I mean, so I don't know if it's worth saying, we really need to get to a place where our essential mental health workers are making a minimum of 15. But that would be a priority of part of the stimulus money, is to try to do something to assist with that. But I like what you have there.
I also like what you have there with definitely stressing the infusing of additional workforce.
Okay. All right. Okay, any other thoughts? Otherwise, I'll play with that and I'll get that out to everybody based upon what I just heard here. But anything else that, we would add on that front? Otherwise, we'll move to number two. Nope. Okay. All right. Telehealth expansion. So I think what came across was that, SB3 really took a forward step in solidifying a number of the flexibilities that were very helpful to behavioral health during the course of the public health emergency. But at that same time, really, that there's a whole other layer of movement forward, or the next step, right, that we've got to kind of get behind. So what I wrote down here was recommendation to expand telehealth back to include all Medicaid eligible providers, not just licensed providers. So basically, what was allowable, I guess, under and it would include allied health professionals, by the way, right? So we're really talking about allied health professionals, and additionally, all those individuals and services that could be provided, under Medicaid. So any feedback or thoughts on that particular recommendation? Support it, toss it, revise it?
Fully support it.
I think it's good, Carrie. And I think it's fine that it overlaps with some of the the other work group we're on. I think it's fine that it kind of, it's okay to have some duplication.
And I've asked Mel to put it on the public policy agenda for our next meeting as well.
Okay. All right.
I don't know if this is important or not. So I'm not proposing anything. I'm actually thinking out loud, which is always a mistake on a YouTube broadcast, I guess. My understanding of Senate Bill 3 is that it permits telehealth from the standpoint of both scope of practice and reimbursement. So my question is, if we're focused on, are we only focused on Medicaid providers? And because at least as I understand it, if you can't use telehealth for anything that's not licensed from a scope of practice standpoint, irrespective of payer. And so does that matter to us in this group?
So Steve, are you saying essentially, again, because we're highlighting Medicaid, that, what happens for, folks with commercial health insurance or kind of other payers essentially?
Or private pay. So if you have a non-licensed person, so I guess that'd be back to the certified individuals. They would not be able to perform any duties. And like even if a third party payer couldn't pay for it, but a private pay couldn't pay for it, as I understand it.
Yeah, so yeah, Steve's 100% right. It's under the IPLA sort of chapter of this. So I think Medicaid in there, the word Medicaid in there is probably unnecessary, or maybe muddies the water a bit.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Yeah, but I also understand that the need to draw some line somewhere. So it's kind of a hard thing to balance.
No, I agree. But as an example, I mean, you could not, I think, is this not correct? You could not provide telehealth for Recovery Works. That's, if it's not Medicaid being paid for it, you could not use telehealth for Recovery Works. And that doesn't make sense to me. Gambling is an example of another provider that is not necessarily licensed. And so anyway, I just think if we were to think about this and we want to do it in a comprehensive way, yeah, I would agree. I like Jay's idea of striking Medicaid.
Okay. And I wonder then if this takes on at all. So I completely understand what everybody's saying here about, that Medicaid being, too small. I guess I wonder, is there something in here that we want to be able to differentiate, right, between essentially, the process of establishing that, right, under Medicaid and other, I guess, state payers, right? So it might be Recovery Works or DCS, as compared to so we can there can be stuff that, specifies certain pieces for commercial insurance, you know what I mean? I just think that working through things with commercial insurance, and how that ultimately impacts businesses, health insurance costs, right? And I mean, it can become a whole other layer of discussion. So do we want to just keep it simple and say our goal is just to expand, period, right? Back to include all eligible providers and payers, but then just kind of understand that this might be in the end a two-step process, because I would hate to see that we don't get where we need to be on Medicaid, DCS, and or recovery works because we're finagling with trying to get something on the commercial side, right? You know what I mean? Of self-funded plans and, everything else.
So this is just a recommendation, right? So whoever takes this recommendation and works on it, maybe they can sort through that part.
That's a really good point, Katie, because I mean, the work for us at DMHA is just starting when the council votes on kind of the overall outline of the recommendations for final report. So, that will be stuff that we'll have to research and flesh out.
And I agree. And I think I obviously I am the one who brought it up, so I like leaving it broad, but I think it would be okay if you wanted to say, like a sub-bullet, at a minimum, this shall include all providers that are certified in a way that's recognized by the state or reimbursed in a way that's recognized by the state. That might be, I think those are the two areas that recognized by the state for purpose of reimbursement and certification.
Okay. Any other on that particular recommendation? Otherwise, we'll revise it, according to the feedback and then get it back out. Or are we good and to move on to the next one, which is licensing?
I'm good.
Okay. All right, licensing. So obviously this is something that was also reported throughout the data. And then in addition, it kind of times up with some other efforts that are being discussed and looked at relative to licensing. So obviously part of the problem is a couple fold. One, there's a backlog or challenges are happening for IPLA. Two, IPLA is full of paper for still many of these professions, which is not helpful to us being, expedient in the process. That there's the issue of reciprocity, and then there is, in some cases, some behavioral health groups in the state that would like to see compacts, right, take place. So what I just put in there as a draft, and let me give you a little bit of background here. I think everybody's probably familiar with it, but the state of Indiana does have a process for military spouses under which the individual can apply for and get licensure recognition when they move to the state. That's a little bit more of a probably closer in line with universal licensure recognition. So really, there is an established approved process that what we'd like to say is, can we expand that to behavioral health licenses, right? Now, separate from that is the fact that you are going to have some groups that are going to still want compacts. Compacts probably need to be thought of on an individual basis, right? You know what I mean? But something like the expansion of the military spouse process to behavioral health and the psychology board could be great. The only thing I'm going to say is that on this, which might be a discussion point, is to date, Indiana uses, if they have, you're going to forgive me if I mess up the language, equivalent training, background, experience, right? And so the problem sometimes we run into there is whether or not we have the skill set within particular divisions or departments to assess those things and achieve consistent responses, right? Whereas, in some cases, really it's been easier for some states to do this when they simply refer to if the scope of practice, right? If I've already been a licensed provider and, I'm trying to move my license from Illinois to Indiana and, I have a basically similar scope of practice, you know what I mean? And I've been, in practice and licensed for this period of time. I don't know that necessarily going back and vetting, my degrees, my transcripts, all of that stuff produces, a safer point of care, because really you're just saying my scope of practice is similar. So anyways, the recommendation would be focus on legislative advocacy to, one, modernize and achieve full digitization of application processes, and that can be worded differently because there's still people involved. B, extend the military spouse licensing rule to all license governed by the Behavioral Health Board and the Psychology Board. So any feedback, thoughts on that, questions?
Carrie, this is Sharon. I'm going to jump in here because I have a meeting at 10 o'clock and I'm going to have to jump out. Having served on the licensure board for the psychology licensure board for 20 years and having had significant experience with the behavioral health board, because I do all the licensure paperwork for my master's graduates, full modernization and digitalization of the process is really important.
Okay.
That those two boards, our board staffs are overworked and understaffed. And having had, like I said, having had that people experience with them for quite a while, I know how that goes. Trying to move forward with at least the psychology SIPAC, I think it's extremely important. It is running rampant in other jurisdictions. And I think it's just a matter of time that it comes to Indiana. We've had that conversation. We had that conversation on the board for several years before I left the board. So I know the board members are generally aware of this. The psych board members are aware of it. I don't know what it means from the behavioral health standpoint. But there's a general conversation about how difficult it is and how time consuming it is to become licensed in Indiana. So whatever we can do to help those pieces would be really important. The military spouse rule, psychology did deal with that rule. I only recall 2 or 3 people who became licensed under that rule. That doesn't mean I don't think we should use it. I'm simply saying I think it may have been underutilized at the time. We had very few people who came through that way. So what you have, I very much support.
Aaron, what was the biggest barrier for them to go all electronic?
It's a PLA barrier. And I don't know what it is. I think some of it has to do with IT, because there are, and I don't think I'm saying anything out of turn. It's very clear if you look at their web pages. There are materials on both boards' web pages that are very outdated. And every time I say something about it, the issue is IT is backlogged and they haven't had time to take care of this. So there are things that are just not accurate there because the board rules have changed.
I'll just add that I totally support this also. And, I am aware that in the legislature, not too distant past, there were numerous attempts to cut back on IPLA's duties and resources. So that has been a struggle just to maintain where they are. Obviously, they need more. And I guess I was going to ask Sharon, if you know the answer to this, is there a reason why we have to pass a law for compacts? And are there any states that delegate that to their IPLA?
A compact would mean, was the conversation we had when I was on the board. The compact is a legislative issue because it is perceived as allowing some entity outside of the state of Indiana to control licensure in the state of Indiana. And that, I know there's been a nursing compact, but we have been told that the legislator was not going to be really happy about some other entity having control. I don't really think that's how the site compact works, but that is how it was being perceived. And we were having a lot of trouble getting past that. I don't know what happened with the legislature this year because the site compact was brought before the legislature and it didn't pass. But I didn't follow it closely enough to know why. I don't know where the snag fell.
I think there's you can't speak for 150 people, but I did hear a lot that, well, we've got a compact for this and a compact for that. And why are we having all these compacts? And that's why I don't know if it's an option. I don't know if other states do it, but I think there are probably some members of the legislature that might be open to passing legislation to delegate the authority that if IPLA thinks it's in the best interest of the profession, then the state could enter into a compact. But I don't know if that's an option or not, but I'm just throwing it out there as an idea.
I don't know. And I will say that if you think about what a compact looks like, thinking about the site compact specifically, I want to say there are 13 to 15 states that are part of the compact right now, which Ohio just went into it. It does mean that people in the compact, psychologists in the compact, can either practice telehealth in all of the other states and vice versa. Or if they choose to, they can request permission to physically practice within the compact states for up to 30 days a year. So you really are talking about a more universal license,
right?
In that sense. And I think some people might get itchy about that. I'm not having as much of an issue about it as I used to. That's a longer conversation than I have time for right now. But I think there are people who are going to get very itchy about that. And I have no idea. I've not heard anything about a similar compact for any other mental health profession. Nursing is the only one I have any knowledge of.
Yeah, there are a number of professions that are talking about it, and the social workers are talking about it like a couple years down the line. So it's going to keep coming up, for good or for bad. So. Okay, I agree, Carrie. I think this is a good start. I don't know if this is where we will end, but I think this is a really good start.
Anybody else? Thank you, Sharon and Steve. Anybody else have any additional feedback on the licensing recommendation? Okay, all right. All right, thanks, Sharon. All right, so we're going to move on to number 4, which is loan forgiveness funding recommendation. So that was something that was brought up, I think, Zoe, by you at the last meeting, which is that we have this mechanism, but it's not funded. And so we put in here the recommendation use of, which I'll just say COVID stimulus funding, to use that for the state to begin to fund the behavioral health loan forgiveness program and include within that eligible certain certified, providers, meaning I guess those recognized by the state. So, and obviously there would still be a need to think about how this is funded longer term, but I think that there was the thought about, can licensing fees also then kind of go into funding some of this? So Zoe, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. I know this is something I think that I've heard you talk about a number of different times. So any thoughts about this recommendation, revisions to the wording or anything along those lines?
No, I think you summarized it very well.
You think it's worth adding the scholarship idea to this as well? So it's kind of hitting thing on both ends. Like a scholarship opportunity to have $5,000 off this year's, BSW program, if you apply for it, something like that. Just getting people to enter and not just deal with the back end low forgiveness. Just
I really like that, Katie. I agree that kind of hitting it from both sides is I think it's a pretty clean fit. But I mean, I'm open to push back on that.
And Jay, do you know, can I ask, like, we passed, and I was involved in it, the loan forgiveness program, and at least I thought DMHA was like all in, and they put together this great website, and I thought it was very effective, and then all of a sudden it wasn't funded anymore. Do you know what's behind that?
It was before my time when that decision was made, but we're hopeful to bring it back, hopefully very soon. And so that's this particular recommendation. Hopefully, we'll be able to check off the box pretty soon. So I think we're thinking in terms of sustainability and how to incorporate the private sector. How do we make this more than just money going out, but in more of like a celebration of people that choose to be behavioral health care providers. And I think that the scholarship idea as well is part of this. But yeah, it's not, I think it was just there wasn't money for it, and I don't think it was administered the best because of the state being the state. So there may be something we want to look into with kind of how the feds did the PPP program, right, where they partnered with banking partners or whatnot to actually administer the program, right, as opposed to it coming out of the state, because things tend to get kind of mucked up when they're wrapped up in the state process.
Yeah, and probably just to echo what Jay's saying there, Carrie, if there's a way that we could put some wording in there about accessibility and ease of getting these funds to individuals, because for example, the federal program, through HRSA can sometimes, be very, challenging for folks. And so then that challenge gets in the way of people even applying because it's too cumbersome. So whatever we could do from an accessibility standpoint or having someone to walk them through that process, I think would be really beneficial. And also tying back to what Jay was saying, of course, giving money without a commitment. So a commitment to serve our community, mental health needs, for I've seen many agreements 2 to 3 years, with a payback tied to that, I think would be really important as well. And we could do that loan funding, maybe in some of our rural markets, we give more, where the need is greater, to really drive people to those locations. So just a few other, key items that I think would really make this program successful.
Steve,
I like it, Zoe.
Steve, I can answer your question. Kevin funded that with some one-time funds that came from some kind of performance money. And I don't want to give you I can't remember the name, but it was, I think came from, I know it was federal money that came back into the state as performance reward, and it was one-time money. And so he used that to fund the program. It was never funded through the state legislature. It was federal funds that DMH took and put in the fund, and it lasted for a couple of years.
Yeah, I remember there was some combination of Department of Health and AG and something else, I think. So yeah, and obviously the bigger the pot, the better. But I remember it not even being that big of a pot and still having a significant benefit.
Yes.
So
like 600,000 or something.
Yeah.
What it was.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to this is for a recommend, because we are planning on doing this, so it's going to happen. I would maybe in terms of a recommendation, I would put more of a longer term lens, like the legislature should, add a line item or something, to make it crystal clear that this is a kind of thing that needs to happen almost in perpetuity, as opposed to with one-time funding.
Got it. Okay.
I agree. And I would even just, and I'm not saying you should write this down. I'm just for all us to think about. To me, this is the perfect thing for the opioid settlement fund. That would, it's going to be ongoing. It totally fits. Anyway, that's just a possibility for future.
Okay, so what I've got here then is what we're going to do is we're going to expand this recommendation from loan repayment to also including, and this is the language that I'm coming up with, you can tell me if you prefer something else, to tuition assistance. program. So that is broad. It can be used in many different ways. So whether it's scholarship or not, right? It's kind of helping people get into school, right? You know what I mean? And then in the school process or the training process. So tuition assistance programming and loan repayment programming funding, targeted by COVID stimulus funds, delegating that, we really want to ensure that it has an ease and accessibility that is not the same as or different from the National Health Service Corps loan repayment program, which is highly administratively burdensome to organizations and to individuals. Number two, I'll play with that language a bit. In addition to that there is clearly tied to this, which is probably already a part of the process, that a commitment to serve, right, in the capacity within the state for 2 to 3 years. And then in addition to that, what we're going to talk about is the consideration of, based upon, I guess, regional mapping, right, and needs, maybe even, well, you could use some of the same numbers that are used for the National Health Service Corps program, but something that delegates essentially that some of this could also not be, hey, everybody gets the same amount, right? That essentially regional needs, whether it be rural and or it could be very urban areas, right? That, or certain segments of the state where there is just, because of, health equity issues, right? You know what I mean? And or diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, that there just simply are not enough providers, that the allocation of those funding may look different, right? Depending on those needs. And then that additional piece, which is that, in tandem with the short term kind of infuse the system with this, we also need to pursue the addition of legislatively, how funds continue to be apportioned on a regular basis here forward to, sustain this past one-time funding. Did I sum that up correctly?
And I think we want the terminology to be so that it's not taxable income to the recipient. So it either has to be a grant or a scholarship, right?
Well, I'm pretty sure loan forgiveness, there's no way around it.
Yeah, but if you're giving them upfront money.
Upfront, yeah, scholarship, you're right. Yeah, that's good.
We want to use that terminology so it's not taxable to the recipient.
Okay. Okay. All right. Are we good to go on to the next one regarding the raising awareness of workforce or building the pipeline?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So on that one of the other things that came across both in discussion and in the data was that, we need to have and be using funds to build kind of, we say kind of a public marketing campaign. Well, there's two components to this. There's the, kind of raise the recommendation, which was kind of use money to develop a campaign about our workforce needs across the state, similar to the Know the O campaign, which has been, to our knowledge and awareness, an effective strategy. And then number two was the monies and developing some type of campaign or connection to middle school and above, right, regarding human service professional involvement. So that, similar to what we do to encourage STEM involvement very early on, maybe it's before middle school, we'll have to decide, but really kind of beginning that process of emphasizing human services, professional options for youth very early on. This could also be something, I don't think we have to write it in here, but could absolutely be connected to some of the different apprenticeship programs and or funding streams that can be developed that exist with DWD. But those were the two things that came up. But the recommendation would be the use of the COVID stimulus funds to develop, again, we'll have to play with the terminology here, but middle school and above awareness of human service professional career options like STEM efforts, and then B, public statewide campaign on workforce needs and behavioral health, like the Know the O campaign. So thoughts, feedback on that, tweaks we want to make, things we need to consider in that recommendation.
The only thing I would add to that, Carrie, is really taking the effort on a regional type basis. Because as we know, if we're just doing it within our state, we're just robbing Peter to pay Paul. And so taking that more on a regional or even expand that beyond regional to other states, and how to get the word out that Indiana is a great place to live, and kind of tying some of that into this campaign.
Gary, I've been to Tennessee on a couple of occasions, and they have had all-state conferences where they bring in high school students to a human services conference, and there are employers there who are kind of selling themselves as a future and getting people interested in any type of human service field. That might be something we could do as a state just to try to pique the interest of high school students as they're making their decision to go to college.
Part of the recommendation might be to kind of research what other states have done successfully to start reaching out to these middle school, high school kids. Because this is not my expertise. I don't know how to do this well, but this is just a recommendation. So, research successful strategies to raise awareness of the human services field beginning in middle school, and then implement that in a regional level would be recommendation, I think.
So one of the questions I have then is, where do we think this falls? So like, as we're talking about researching these things, should we be saying that that there should be the establishment of some kind of, study group, right? Or some subcommittee. I'm not saying maybe it's this one. I don't know. You know what I mean? Somebody that we're saying this would fall under this purview, right? So, and Jay, I don't know, would this be something that, if we're thinking about it's all connected back to things like similar to Know the O campaign, is this something that would be falling under, both these topics under DMHA, right? To have establish a committee that involves maybe different people who then move this forward. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what group, right, takes the reins on this? Because if we leave it as it's just something we suggest does, I mean, maybe later on somebody can figure out who's tasked with this. But to me, if we're delegating COVID stimulus funds or recommending that it gets delegated to this, right, because we want to raise awareness now, not in, 2 or 3 years, what group needs to be moving the dial on this? And that's really for everybody. But I wondered about whether, again, I don't know how things like this happen at the state, right? You know what I mean? Who drives these kinds of things, like in the case of the Know the O campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage some humility on the part of myself and the rest of the state, governmental entities here. And I don't know how this fits into the recommendation. So just full disclosure there, I'm just sort of talking kind of just in general about these sorts of campaigns. I think the Indianapolis Colts, for example, are probably moving the needle much more with their campaign than we'd be able to do with the state. Not that I don't know how that could go into a recommendation from the Behavioral Health Commission, but just like I think for me, awareness campaigns are fantastic. I think there's a level of skepticism that accompanies a government awareness campaign. I think that you'll probably see that increase over the next couple of years, just given the climate of that's happened during COVID. I think what I like to do and what I think we need to figure out how to do is really celebrate and champion the importance of the behavioral health workforce. And so that's something I think that we can and should do. I think when it comes to sort of stigma and awareness campaign, I think maybe something like develop public-private partnerships or something to that effect, I think is probably more in line with how I view the effectiveness of state awareness campaigns, if that makes sense.
So is our recommendation is to identify a work group to be delegated to work on this then? I mean, because I don't know, we know who it is, but could we recommend that one is identified?
Would it not be FSSA, Jay? Because you've got
No, I mean,
DDRs and other
it would
umbrellas.
be. I'm just skeptical, and this maybe is a weird thing to be as somebody in my position. I'm just sort of skeptical about the impact of something like that. I mean, I think Know the O just kind of came about in a perfect storm of sort of like the need and the focus and the content all kind of like perfectly kind of work together to have a pretty big impact. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being too negative right now. It's it's Tuesday morning. It's kind of cloudy outside, so maybe I should.
So the partner that we have done some great work with on a local level is our local Greater Lafayette Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce has the ways to help with workforce, and so they could be an ideal partner since they specialize in workforce development. So I've had a lot of success. We've started panels similar to what the proposal is saying at group because we've done some pretty creative things in this community. So maybe we could do something around working with our chamber, or also carry the great work you've done on the workforce development side.
Yeah, I think that is something. I don't know, like maybe. I think it's fine to say FSSA should convene a work group, kind of cross-sector, regionally focused awareness type workforce awareness group. I think a specific dictate about like a campaign across the state. I don't know. I'm just skeptical of that. But everything else, maybe I'm just being too negative here.
So I hear, and I've got down the piece about the Chamber of Commerce, right? DWD, the potential, and I can play with this a little bit, that, the FSSA convening, right, kind of a group. And then I guess what I'm going to add here is that then, really, if we're talking public-private partnerships, I think it's great with the chamber, but is this also then, is there a role for, there may be other private entities that want to get into this, but for associations, right? So the thing I'm thinking about is that, I'm only thinking through the lens right now of a group like ICCMHC, okay? But I could think through the lens of the Indiana Psychological Association, right? Or I could think through the lens of various groups and collaboratives that are coming together, right? That could be entities that, would move the dial on some of these things. But a group like ICCMHC, right? You know what I mean? We're targeting very specific professionals, right? We have very specific needs that not everybody in the larger BH community has. So if there was the ability, again, through, I'm just saying, an RFP process, right? You know what I mean? For associations to then also be able to be a part of the process to move the dial on, their marketing campaign needs, right? You know what I mean? Telling the story, developing kind of awareness campaigns, working with, right, various entities to, at a more local level in order to move the dial on this kind of stuff. I guess I'm wondering people's thoughts about the idea of the role that associations might have in something like this.
I think they're a very important partner, not just ICCMHC, but also Rural Health Association and all those folks. So, I think they're an important partner, certainly.
Anybody else with feedback?
I don't know if I have helpful feedback, but I think we need to have, whether it's the chamber or the mental health advocacy groups or the behavioral health provider groups, or like, I think there are a lot of players, and how you organize it. Like, I don't think there's a right or wrong way, whether it's the state or it's contracted out or an RFP, or, I could even envision, we contracted Dmha or FSSA, somebody contracted with the Wellness Council to do some workforce stuff in behavioral health arena. Like I could see them with a advisory council made up of many of us. I mean, I just don't think there's a right or wrong way, but we need to include all the appropriate parties to make it work.
Okay, all right, I'll play with that language, given what everybody kind of said here. All right, and so then on number 6, which actually is the last one because number 7 is a typo by me, I reiterated telehealth, is certifications in allied health. And Steve, you sent some specific language, you know what I mean, on this front, but I think our idea is that we have to explore expansion options to leverage further recognized certifications for workforce and including considerations of revisions of scope for allied health. But in addition, obviously that all has to be tied to reimbursement, right? Methodology. So do you want to speak a little bit to this one, and then we can get some feedback from the group on, you know, maybe what has to be revised or what has to be better stated in this recommendation?
Sure. I just, you know, I think I've said before that in my view, one of the major opportunities to expand the workforce is within this area that we're calling allied health, or that can include certifications that ensures quality through training and education and testing and certification, and then has the opportunity to have the certification pulled if they're not acting appropriately, or if there's some ethical violation. I think this is a way without all the trappings of licensure, but you achieve a lot of the same results from a quality standpoint. And then, yes, it has to be tied to reimbursement. And, you know, that's just a win-win for everybody. So it's a way to move individuals up the career ladder. It's a way for providers to increase qualified staff people, and then they get reimbursed for it, and then they can pay higher salaries. So to me, it's just the obvious logical, and it's so like if you're going to build a continuum of workforce and loan forgiveness or scholarships is on one end, well, that's for the future. That's for future licenses. Certifications, that's a now. It can happen immediately, and it's a way to impact the workforce substantially and quickly.
So did anybody have any thoughts or feedback on what Steve stated, or, you know, just in general on this recommendation?
No, I agree with Steve. I guess on the operational side of things, you know, it's really then advocating from a payer standpoint to get those things paid for. And I think that's really been where the obstacle comes in, especially on private insurance, recognizing that those certifications mean something and that they're going to reimburse at a reasonable rate.
Yeah, there's almost like the need for an additional statement that these certifications that are developed or legitimized, you know, that those have some sort of a that they're approved as a behavioral health worker in Medicaid rates, or approved provider.
Yeah, I would agree. Some language around state recognition and state reimbursement.
All right, any other thoughts on that one? Otherwise, what I'll do is I'll take what was already sent and what was just discussed and try to tweak that a little bit also.
Thanks.
Okay, and then anything else? So of the data that you look through, right, is there anything that we are missing that is not being talked about that anybody feels is a, significant topic that needs to be, what I'll call in kind of the first set of recommendations. I don't want to think we lose track of the fact that at the last meeting, we talked about the fact that we want to get some recommendations out, but we also don't want to lose track of all of the good information that's available to us and thinking about, our needs that might not be sitting on this initial list, right, of recommendations. So anything that we're missing, you feel like at this point for this initial go of recommendations?
So I think the one thing when I was looking at that list and thinking of just infusing additional people into our state and workforce that I've learned from our local chamber that they're doing with some of their funds on a community basis is they're actually paying for manufacturing some relocation and enticing people to move from other states to relocate here for manufacturing. And I thought, wouldn't that be amazing if we could do that for behavioral health?
So Zoe, you're saying they're using some of the funds available to them to provide what to employers, and those employers then are using that to support the relocation costs of those employees?
Yes, as
Okay.
incentive to get people to move to our area.
Okay, all right. What anybody have some, thoughts on that as a, independent recommendation currently, and or if it fits in the scope of anything we've talked about, just kind of as a sub bullet.
I don't have any additional comments on that item, Carrie, but one thing that still bothers me, and this might be just a can of worms we can't open, but I still struggle with some of the eligibility of our folks that are in recovery that have criminal histories. And that process for getting waivers and getting approved to get their licenses or certifications or be an approved provider when they have certain criminal charges. There is something in Indiana code that lists non-waivable offenses. And some of those are really challenging for our folks in recovery to get through. So I don't know what that would be, but that is a barrier to hiring for a lot of us.
I agree. I don't know what the right answer is, but I've spent some time on this, just trying to figure out people to hire, or what the process is at MHAI, which is pretty open in the way we look at things. But I've tried to look at guidance from the state, how are state workers employed, and what we do have contracts with DCS, and there's certain situations there, and I haven't even found one place. So I agree there are obstacles, but I haven't even found one place that provides good guidance or universal guidance that would be helpful. Like, to me, it would be helpful. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one, but if we came up with guidance for employers on what is an appropriate process for from a criminal history background check, recovery standpoint, I'm not sure how you would word it, but I think that would be value added to me. Like I've talked to IDOI, and I can't find anything. It's pretty much you're on your own. You make up the rules as you want, and you take the risks, and unless you have a funder, and then all funders are different. And some kind of universality, best practice, I think would be great. And maybe it exists, and I don't know about it, but we have spent time on it. We can't figure it out.
Yeah. And there's some of the processes that happen now for people to overcome that are really borderline inappropriate and traumatizing for those individuals. Which is very discouraging and makes people want to just give up. So I think looking at that process from a trauma-informed lens would be helpful. But there's also these, this list in Indiana code of like, and one of them is child neglect. So if you've ever had a felony child neglect charge ever in your life, you are not eligible to provide mental health services. And we all know that sometimes is a part of addiction, the disease of addiction. So I don't know. It seems like that's a big barrier for if we're going to, especially want to expand our workforce, something that's worth looking at least. And I don't know how to do that.
So Katie, I would say I love this whole conversation, and I would love to continue it probably offline outside of the Behavioral Health Commission. So I don't think the answer necessarily is legislative in nature. It may be. I don't not this kind of that fact, but I think that we probably need to figure out kind of as collectively what we can do from an administrative or advocacy standpoint, kind of small a advocacy, right? For like, just around here to talk. But I would love to continue this conversation offline because I fully agree with you. There may be some options in terms of like expungements or other sort of like legal avenues that we can pursue for folks as well through this. And Steve and Brandon especially, I think that we are doing a little bit of that on a pretty small scale.
Yeah, and of course the problem with that is legal fees. But the other thing that I would just throw out there, and I know you mentioned it, Carrie, but I'm wondering if we want to bullet around the issue of equity. Obviously, that's a huge workforce issue on many levels, from employers that aren't well trained or educated to individuals that aren't well trained and educated, and I'm sure there are many aspects beyond that. But we talk about it all the time, and we say it should be central to everything we do. But I'm posing the question as to whether or not we want to highlight it and make a bullet about it.
So there's two ways we could go about that, and I'll put both in, and then we can. So an independent standalone statement, okay, regarding equity. At the flip side of that is that as I rewrite all of these, right, we can also figure out within the context of each one of these recommendations how it is that we're supporting equity, right? And so I will write it up in ways that allow us to look at both, and then make a decision as to whether we want to keep it all, right, or you know what I mean? Do we want to have it be a standalone or just embedded within and infused throughout the recommendations? But I think that all three of the additional ones, I think are good ones. So let me take a crack at drafting something up here, tweaking some of these others, getting them back out to everybody. My goal would be that we would have the next version out sometime next week for everybody to look at. So then you can send feedback on that front. I'm not going to schedule a follow-up meeting at this point. I want to get the next draft written, get it out to you. And if we're really not hitting the mark and we need to kind of tweak a few, then, I think that we could probably work outside of a meeting to get those done, and then really move towards trying to get something approved here and written, more formally. And some of you might be better writers than I am. So I'm absolutely, please let me know if there's something that could be more eloquently stated. So does anybody else have anything else to further add at this point in time? Otherwise, I believe we're scheduled just to 10:30. So I want to be mindful of the fact that, people might have things scheduled and we need to wrap up and move on with our days.
Good meeting.
Carrie. I
Thank
think we
you.
got a lot done.
This is a great meeting. Thank you, Carrie.
All right.